when I was growing up in Brooklyn, I felt really safe. Sure, there were those moments that I would be scared, but, all of us get scared a little bit. And even us grown-ups get scared from time to time. But Daddy always taught me to walk strong, my shoulders back, my feet firmly on the ground, be aware of what was around me, so I wouldn't be surprised, but to walk with confidence and to keep my head up. That was super good advice. But, I always felt safe because I was in my neighborhood. Everybody knew I was Vinny's daughter, Tony's granddaughter, and I was surrounded by people who knew them and who knew me. And if all else failed, and was someone who was a little bit younger than my daddy and my grandpa, they knew Uncle Pat. Uncle Pat was a New York City homicide detective, and nobody messed with him. And I was his niece, and so certainly I was safe. And so I always felt secure. And if all else hadn't been covered, my teachers let me know with all certainty that wherever I was and whatever I was doing, God was watching over me. There was no place I could go and nothing I can do that God didn't see me. And for the most part, that made me pretty happy. There were those occasional moments when I was hoping and praying God was taking a nap, like when I would get sassy with Mama or fussing with my sister. But, as it turned out, God didn't nap. And, and so there was that. And the truth was, my neighborhood was safe. So it was really odd to me that when, as adults, Keith and I moved out to the middle of the country, people routinely asked me, "So were you scared growing up in Brooklyn?" In the beginning, it was kind of a weird question, and I remember always getting a little scrunched up face, and and now I understand looking, out into a different world, as it were, from the Kansas view. New York looks like a different place from here, but and the answer was no. I wasn't scared because I grew up in a neighborhood of people who looked like me, who acted like me, and within those city blocks, most people actually spoke Italian as their primary language. They were all teaching their children to speak English, but most of them spoke Italian. And honestly, everybody's parent and everybody's grandparent could scold us. We knew better than to talk back to anybody. And we also knew, but so there was that part. But the other part was, if anything were to ever happen, we knew we could knock on any door and we would be taken care of. There was always that assurance that the people of our neighborhood would watch over us and take care of us. And the bad people came from some other place, but the people in our neighborhood were good people, and they would watch over us and make sure that we were safe and everything was okay in the neighborhood. And you developed relationships sitting on your porch. We all had, we called them stoops, but on our, because really, we didn't really have a porch. We had steps with these little cement things on the side of them when we'd sit out there, or in our backyards, which, was kind of like the size of the little cement that Keith and I have outside of our little back patio, but not really a yard. And the neighbors was right up against ours, and we'd be sitting there in the summertime because we didn't have air conditioning. So everybody would be outside, and so that, as we'd be sitting there eating dinner, the neighbor would be hanging over the fence talking to us. I mean, it was very free-flowing, and people got to know each other because we were so close to one another. And maybe sometimes people knew more of your business than you wanted them to know, but there was this sense of community. All of my friends were the people that lived around me. No one ever moved outside of our neighborhood. We were the first ones when I was 16 to move away. And people left when they went to heaven, but other than that, no one ever left our neighborhood. And so there was this sense of communal living. And so nowadays, things are somewhat different. I find that neighboring isn't as natural as our society has become more transient. People move from city to city, town to town, state to state, country to country. And so you come to this new place, even us just coming from Lawrence to here, and we buy a home in a very nice subdivision, and literally the person next door came to say hi to us, and that literally was the one neighbor who came to say hi to us. And no reflection, poor reflection on our neighbors, but that was the one person. And so what happens, I think, is that if a bunch of people move in at the same time, they become connected because of this group move. But if someone else moves in later, you know, that's already a group that's established. But think about how that impacts our relationships. We don't have that sense of community and neighboring that we once did at some other point in the future. Number one, air conditioning really is much, I love air conditioning. I can breathe because of air conditioning. But just air conditioning alone has impacted our society because we stay inside more. And so when you look outside my neighborhood in the summertime, and there are no children until nighttime. You know, one, their parents are working during the day, and the kids are in summer camps for the most part. But then it's not until it's getting later that kids are outside at all. And so even the children, at least in the cul-de-sac next to us and the cul-de-sac that I can see into, aren't outside. And so then their parents aren't hanging out watching them. There is something that has changed about our society, and as a result, people aren't getting to know each other in the same ways naturally as they have done. And the reason why I bring this up is it has occurred to me that we even, as a faith community, don't know each other as well as we probably could. And as I have thought and prayed and talked, and Outreach has taught and prayed and talked, and I've been in conversation with lots of people, an opportunity came up last summer at our annual conference, and there was this group called the Neighboring Movement out of Wichita, and I was in conversation with Pastor Paul from Countryside and Pastor Jeff from First, and they were interested in exploring this. At about the same time, the Topeka district was organizing our Topeka district churches into networks. And that meant they were going to combine groups of 8 to 10 churches in a network, and they were going to have to send representatives, and those network churches were going to have to create projects and create a whole bunch of new work to do, and you know, clusters of those were going to happen all around the district. And Pastor Paul and Jeff and I thought, you know, we can get on board and do something that we think will really benefit our churches. And what we thought would benefit our 3 churches would be thinking about how we can develop neighboring for ourselves. Now, they have different, you know, Countryside has one demographic. First certainly has its own demographic, and so do we. It's different here in the southwest portion. But it would be something for us to think about, how we think about neighboring, not only for ourselves as a church sitting in this area, but for ourselves sitting in our own neighborhoods where our houses live, and how we could become better neighbors so that we could possibly learn how to engage people possibly to come here to Susanna, but also just how to be more Christ-like in the communities in which we live. So we proposed this to our district superintendent. Kay got on board, and this is how we are living out our responsibility to the conference. We are pretend networking. We're networking by doing the neighboring movement. But also, we are doing this in a way that we think is really going to have a greater impact for Susanna Wesley. Because what we're thinking about is, how do we really learn to love one another in a way that makes a difference for us? Because I have, in my 6.5 years, said to people in the 9 o'clock service, used to be 8:30, well, when I was talking to so-and-so and you give me a blank stare because they go to the other service and y'all have been both coming here for 20, 30 years and you don't know each other. And the same is true of the people at the other service. And one of the ways that we can start thinking about how we come closer together, and this is what I'm so excited about outreach, the Forks and Fellowship, is we're going to create these opportunities for us to get together as a whole church and do things together. But thinking about neighboring is another way. How are we going to form opportunities for us to really engage in each other's lives as people who love one another as we love ourselves? Because it's important for us to get to know each other. How can we reach out to other people if we can't reach out to each other? If we cross each other in the atrium and walk by without really saying hi, other than because I'm at the 9 o'clock and you're at the 10:15, or even I'm at the 9 o'clock and I sit on one side and you sit on the other, we've got some work to do. And this is a perfect opportunity because we're in the dead of winter and we can warm ourselves up, our hearts up, by thinking about how we can move forward. So our first step is very slow. We're going to be talking about it for about 6 weeks, and then we're going to take some steps into it. The people that are leading up this effort are going to attend the next lab. We've already been to Lab 1. We're going to go to Lab 2 this coming Saturday. But you're going to be hearing more and more about it. The Love Your Neighbor is part of our push, because the reason why we do this is because Jesus commanded us to do it. It's not just a good idea or a cute idea. It's what God has said we need to do as followers of God. We need to love God with all of our being. And one of the ways that we show God that we love God with all of our being is to love what God loves. And what God loves is us. So let's be that person. But not just in word, but truly in deed. Susan said to the children, a concrete way for us to do that is to bring the soup, to bring the socks. We may not put the socks on our head, although I think that's a cool idea. But how do we extend that warmth to the people that we're in proximity to? And so the challenge for this week is for you just to intentionally notice the 8 houses that are closest to your house. Just notice them. And as many times as you can, notice them during this week. And then pray for the neighbors in that house. You may not even know the neighbors in those 8 houses. Maybe there's been some changeover, but God knows who they are. So just pray over those 8 houses and whomever inhabits them for the course of this week. Now, if you're like me and you leave the house at 5 or 10 to 7 in the morning, and then maybe you're kind of strolling for the last time at about 8:39, you leave in the dark, come home in the dark. Sometimes you just really don't look around. But I'm saying I'm going to be responsible to intentionally look at those houses and pray over those people. And I'm asking you to do the same. I don't think for this period of time it's going to change those people's lives. I think it's going to change your lives and the way you see your community and the way you feel about the people that live around you and how God sees the people who live around you, because they are beloved children of God and they bear the Christ just as you bear the Christ. So you have to look at the houses around you as much as you can this week and pray for the people who inhabit them. Be it all to the glory of God. Amen.